You're listening to The Grind. Well-caffeinated conversations with disc golfers who are passionate about improving their games and helping others to do the same. Welcome to episode 2 of The Grind. I'm Josiah. Alongside me, my good friend David, and we're going to talk some disc golf.
Sounds like fun.
We have a fun show lined up for you today. We are going to be reviewing the Discraft Buzzz. We are going to be talking about a pro tip from two pros, one on the MPO side, one on the FPO side. We are going to be talking pre-shot routines, what they are, why they're important, what do you do? And we're going to learn a little bit more about my game, so when we have further discussions, you'll know what we're talking about. But first, David, I got to ask you, what are you sipping on and how was your week?
Oh, man. We're sipping on that same Guji that we had last week, but Josiah kindly pulled some espresso with it, and it kind of tastes like, you know, the Captain Crunch Berry cereal. It's
super fruity.
It's got this, man, the sweetness that we were tasting last week with the milk just gives you that, like, it's crazy sweet and fruity. It just it tastes phenomenal. I mean, it's not what I want every single day, but it's definitely a fun experiential cup.
Yeah, for sure. I think that espresso for me, I'd probably prefer something that's a little bit more neutral or even a little bit of bitterness to balance out the milk. But I think every once in a while it's pretty fun to have some kind of fruity single origin to change it up.
Yeah, I think it's good to kind of reset the palate and just kind of process what you're sipping on, because it's easy to get used to that classic cup and then kind of forget like why you appreciate it to begin with.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks to Kiln Coffee Bar for providing the coffee for this podcast. You can find their coffee as well as merch and coffee accessories at kilncoffeebar.com. Anyway, David, how was your week?
It was good, man. Let's see. We did the podcast last Friday, and then on Saturday we drove down to Delta with a few friends. We played Confluence Park. I think they just renamed it, right, to Gunnison's Edge.
Yeah, Gunnison's Edge.
Gunnison's Edge disc golf. And honestly, that's probably my favorite disc golf park in the Valley. I think partially because there's definitely some favorable forehand lines through trees. I talked last week in the podcast about one of the things enjoying was skip shots. And there's definitely a few forehand holes that you can have a fun little skip shot to get to the basket. And yeah, it ended up being a fun round. I think I tied my best round. I actually don't know what my best round is at Confluence, but it's a round.
Tied. I think so. Yeah. When we were prepping for the tournament, I feel like you were doing like 3 or 4 most days.
So I shot -4. I think I ended up winning for our friends that day.
Yeah.
Mike, we were going into the last 3 holes, and Micah and I were neck and neck. And I love you, Micah. Micah fell apart a little bit at the end there.
Hey, you know, it happens. I was 3 strokes back from you. You were 4 down. I was 1 down. Yeah. It's funny because last time I played, I shot my best at 7 down and was pretty stoked about it. 7 birdies, no bogeys. And this time it went 7 birdies, 6 bogeys. And so my brain immediately went, hey, I got to figure out a way for some more consistency, especially on like, hey, the drive wasn't great. That's fine. You should still par at Delta in almost all those holes.
For sure. And again, I think similar to the week before, it seemed like you were playing better than you actually scored. So I was surprised when you told me what your score was.
Well, I still putted well, which I was happy about. It's just like a few low drives where I think my timing was off, and then I wasn't paying attention on the upshots like I should. I think, you think about the drive, you pick your disc, you maybe do a pre-shot routine like we're going to be talking about later. And then you follow through. And then I think sometimes on the upshot, you're just like, hey, I'm just going to fling it toward the basket and I'll putt and figure it out. And so one thing I think it was valuable to me because it was one thing I said, hey, I'm going to change this in my game. I'm going to have the same level of care for every shot and not just say like, hey, my drive was bad, I'll just fling it towards the basket, and then you end up hitting an early tree and you are now fighting for bogey.
Yeah, for sure. Dude, one of my favorite things about Gunnison's Edge, getting down there, it's a 30-minute drive about for us. I live a little bit further away than Josiah.
It's still 45 minutes for me.
Okay, something like that. But so it's a commitment to go down there. But the thing that I love the most about it is I feel like it gives you the most variety of challenging shots for me personally, because there are holes that I cannot go to my forehand. So it forces me to throw some backhand holes. Every once in a while you can try to get away with it, but if you really want to play the course well, you have to be okay going to your backhand.
Yeah, it's the same for the forehand. I feel like some of the backhand gaps are quite a bit tighter than the forehand, and then there's a few holes you just can't really throw a forehand and, expect to get it in the fairway. Okay. I think it's a little bit more, living in Colorado, we thankfully have some courses along the river, so they've got a few big trees here and there, but Delta, while still a fairly easy course, has a few tight lines that you have to nail, and you have to kind of have your timing and your accuracy right to score well. I think sometimes some of the courses we play, you can drive okay, but still end up in the circle with the putt.
Yep.
And I think Delta, for the most part, prevents that.
Yep. There's definitely early trees that will punish you for sure.
Yeah, so getting back to the pre-shot routine, I thought it'd be a fun short discussion just to talk about, hey, what do you do, David? What do I do for pre-shot routines? As well as, why even do them and what are they? And I'll start with what they are, because I feel like, in ball golf, it's a given that you have a pre-shot routine. I think baseball, you kind of have a similar thing where if the batters and the pitchers have a routine they go through. But if you're not coming from a sport, or basketball with a free throw or whatever, but if you're coming from a sport where, like football, where there really isn't much of, there's not really much of a whatever catch routine or throw routine or tackle routine. It's a little bit more kinetic. It can be maybe it's a little odd to see somebody stand on the tee pad and swing before they throw, or line up the shot in some way. And so pre-shot routine is really where you, in order to increase consistency, have a consistent behavior pattern prior to a throw, upshot, or putt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think for me with forehand, I have a pretty consistent, I'm walking up and for the most part aiming, getting an idea of where you want to go. I'd say that probably almost 100% of the time I have a solid walk-up routine mentally that I'm used to going to. But backhand, that's one thing. Actually, going back to Confluence, there was, the first hole going back, I think, is like 13. It's the par 4, if that sounds right.
Yeah, something like that.
I went to throw an Anheuser backhand just for fun. It was actually a second shot. And I didn't do a walk-up routine. I just went up and walked. And I was like, that felt so bad and so wrong. Because I think mechanically, because I didn't go up and have that little walk-up routine to where I'm mentally getting that concept built into my mind for my body just to react, I think my form was completely off because I didn't have a game plan in my mind. I just thought, I'm going to throw an Anheuser in it. Definitely Anheusered a little bit, but I ripped really hard on my arm, and then it Heisered out immediately, and it was terrible.
When you are doing a backhand pre-shot routine, let's say you do one, maybe we should start with forehand. What do you think about, what do you physically do before you get to the tee pad or onto the tee pad, maybe while other people are throwing, when you're doing disc selection, and then what do you physically do on the tee pad? What do you think about, where do you aim? What does that look like for you?
I think it depends on if it's going to be an open hole or a hole that I'm dealing with some obstacles like a tunnel of trees. If I'm doing my pre-routine with my forehand, going through a tunnel of trees, I'm definitely clearing my mind to understand the gap of how I'm going to hit the gap. Because the moment that I start thinking about the trees, I know I'm going to hit those trees because I'm thinking about them. So I think I'm clearing my mind and genuinely believing and understanding that I am going to release this disc on a point that it can have the correct angle to however I want to navigate the trees. And that's definitely all. I'm basically clearing my mind and trying to have some sort of response.
And are you like imagining the line it's going on all the way down to the basket? Are you just thinking about the first gap? Where does your brain go?
I'd say that depends on the hole. There's definitely shorter holes. I have the watching it going all the way down. But when I'm thinking about, anything over 300 feet, for the most part, I'm thinking about how I want to navigate that first gap and where I want it to end up afterwards. So I'm not necessarily as concerned about the exact location where it's going to end up. But if I know I can hit the gap at this angle, then it's probably going to end up in a general area where I'd like to be. Whether if I am finishing right of the hole, if it's par 4, I don't know. So
cool. Yeah, I think that for me, I definitely do the same in terms of when it's a short hole, especially if it's an ace run. Like, of course, I'm imagining the disc, it's full flight to the basket. But I do think once we get to the longer holes, it definitely becomes a little bit more difficult to keep focus or keep my brain engaged all the way down to the basket in terms of imagining that flight. I don't know if that's because I realize that I'm not good enough to control the disc all the way there. And what I really want to do is hit my initial line and then let the disc do the work based on my disc selection.
Yeah.
Going back to your pre-shot routine on the forehand or backhand for that matter, what do you do physically? And do you think of disc selection as part of the pre-shot routine, or is that kind of its own, strategic decision prior to that?
I think for the most part, I know what disc I'm going to throw going into it, unless there's wind. If wind is a variable, I definitely might pull 2 discs out of my bag as I go and do that pre-shot routine, just to get a feel for the wind, and maybe I'll toss up some grass or something that's lying around to get an idea for what I'm working with. And I might adjust depending, but and I might even go up and I'm basically walking up and getting to the point, my release point, and I kind of do like a double twitch or something. I'm thinking about, okay, if it is windy, how is it going to respond? Should I even be throwing a forehand? Because I like throwing a forehand. Is the forehand going to get messed with too much in this? If it's a headwind that's pushing to the right, I probably don't want to be throwing a forehand. And so I'm going to have to second guess. Yeah, so I think the major thing for me that might change a lot of variables for me on my walk-up or practicing with my walk-up. Wind definitely plays a role that'll change my mind a lot in what I'm thinking.
And when you're saying you do a double twitch, you get a feel, especially on the forehand, a feel for that wrist action, the feel of the weight of the disc throwing the outside of the disc, so to speak.
Yep.
As you're lining up, you don't necessarily do a full swing or anything like that. It's mostly just getting that feel.
No, I don't really like going up and doing a full swing, and it almost makes me uncomfortable when somebody goes up and does a full swing forehand. It just is awkward with the forehand. And so for me, it's really just going up and getting my wrists a little warmed up to make sure that each hole that I'm good to go to snap. Yeah, no,
that makes total sense. I do the same on the forehand. I think maybe I learned it from you, or just to get a feel for that wrist action. I feel like, and also just the angle that I want that disc on, both nose angle and wing angle.
Yep.
So nose angle would be front to back. Are you going to throw the disc basically flat, or are you going to throw it with the nose up, or are you going to try to throw it with the nose down? Which you could do, depending on which throw you're doing. All those can make sense sometimes. And then wing angle is the disc, tilted away from or towards your throwing hand, so to speak, hyzer, anhyzer, flat shot. So I think that for the forehand, I struggle with nose angle the most. I usually have a decent control of the wing angle. So I think just having that feel in the pre-shot routine. And then on backhand, where the majority of my throws are, especially if I need to make a line, or if I've got the option, I'm generally going to throw a backhand as long as it's a reasonable line. That's where I've spent the most of my time thinking about pre-shot routine. And so what I usually will do is do disc selection while somebody else is throwing, and I've already usually have an idea what's going on. I'll occasionally bring 2 discs up, but normally I'm going to pick a disc, and then usually on the tee pad, feeling the wind and that sort of thing, I'm going to pick my angle that I want to throw it on. I usually will walk to the front of the tee pad, sight down my disc, even though it makes no sense, just to choose that angle. And then I'll usually just do a standstill warm up to that angle. I don't do a full follow through. I think it would make sense to, but that I feel like it starts to me worrying about my form. So instead, I just make sure that disc is coming back to that angle as I do that quick, maybe 50% power or 30% power, standstill, half throw, basically taking the disc through the throwing motion and then having it return to that angle that I sighted down. And then I walk backwards. Sorry, let me stop there. The other thing that I think is super important is to pick a target for that initial throw.
Yes.
I don't necessarily pick a full flight that I expect, but I pick an initial target and I knowing the disc, knowing the wind as well as I can, knowing the course, hopefully. I pick that initial target, nose and wing angle, and then I walk backwards to where I'm going to start on the tee pad, focusing on that target. So I get to see that target. You don't really necessarily think about this, but if you pick a target at the back of the tee pad and you don't see it all the way down, sometimes that target moves as perspective changes. And so I think that's one thing I've changed, which I think has actually helped my consistency quite a bit backhand, has been, now you choose that target at the front of the tee pad, you walk back so you understand how it's going to change as perspective changes, and then you just commit.
Yeah.
And you just throw. And I think that the thing that I thought about with Delta was just that, hey, my upshots, I'm not making that same pre-shot routine. I'm not thinking enough about the shot. I'm basically just picking a disc on instinct, which I think is fine. Picking an angle on instinct, which I think is fine. But I'm not picking a target, and I'm not actually, getting my body and brain prepared for the throw. Mm-hmm. And so that's one thing I want to, I've committed to keeping my pre-shot routine the same for backhand drives and now for forehand drives. And the next thing is, and for putts. And the next thing is to do that for upshots.
Yeah. When we were preparing for this and I was reading through, that was the first thing I thought. I was like, you know what? I don't think I mentally go through the upshot in my mind. I typically just go up, grab the zone, firebird, whatever it might be, and I just roll with it. And if I'm using the Luna, there was one time at Confluence that I used the Luna because I really wanted to practice a backhand upshot. And
forgive us, we call a single course 3 things: Delta, Gunnison's Edge, Confluence. Yeah. The town is Delta. The park that it's in is Confluence Park, and the disc golf course is Gunnison's Edge. It's all the same round. We didn't get to play that much disc golf this past week. So anyway, sorry, continue. With the Luna.
With the Luna, I hit that first tree because I just got up there and threw backhand without even going through a walk-up in my mind. But I think that's something that I would really like to start applying to my game, is being intentional about every single... When you step up to your disc, I mean, that's one thing when it comes to a tournament that I feel like that I pride myself in, is being able to walk away from the previous shot, whether it's a good shot, bad shot, whatever it might be, but being able to walk to the next shot, say that I am on this shot. And when you are on that shot, you should be intentionally preparing for that shot. And I think I neglect that very often in my upshot game as well. I was going to go back to, you mentioned I'm not following through in your pre-workout routine because you feel like it might make you think too much about messing up your form or whatever it might be. I think that's wise in the sense that, the whole goal of your pre-shot routine is so that you are methodical and that you're not having to think about what you're doing when you do throw your shot. And so I think that's the whole goal. You're just waiting for your body to respond. So I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I try to, especially in anything that matters, but in general, not think about form at all during my throw. Just really pick a target, aim at the target, throw, commit to that throw, commit, and then just accept whatever happens, If
it hits the target every time.
Yeah. That's why Discraft just signed me to a 20-year, $20 million contract. They said, we can't pay you more than McBeth per year, but we can pay you more years because we know you're going to be better than him for longer. But speaking of McBeth, I pulled up this quote. There's this awesome video that Jomez put out on Paul McBeth with his upshot tips. So go onto YouTube and search it. I can't give you the URL, HTTPS. Anyway, but the quote, he's talking about aiming on upshots, but I think this could apply anywhere. He said, Nate Sexton and I used to remind each other, if you're playing bad, it's because you're not aiming. And I feel like this just reinforces it. It's not just an AM thing. This is the best pro in the world talking to, USDGC champion, saying, hey, don't forget to aim. And it's easy to let distractions, tournament pressure, just the annoyance of your last shot. Especially, I think that's what got me in, Delta is like, oh, I shanked my drive. I just want to throw this up there and putt. Everybody's waiting on me. So I do feel like you let the last shot go, and that part of the way you can do that is with the pre-shot routine.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely something that I'm going to be working on this week, is making sure that I'm being intentional with those upshots and that pre-shot routine, applying it to my game. So you guys got to know my disc golf game a little bit last week with Josiah asking a few questions about my game. This week, I get to have the privilege of asking Josiah some questions about his game. I kind of have an idea of a little bit of Josiah's experience with the game, but I actually don't know a whole lot about how much he was playing and whatnot. Josiah, you moved to Grand Junction about, was it 3 years ago now?
Yeah, I think 3.5, something like that.
When you were playing disc golf far before moving here. I think you got into it a little bit in college. Tell us a little bit about your early years of disc golf and how you got into the game.
Yeah, man, thanks. I think I may have played my first round in high school, visiting my brother in college. I have some vague recollection of that. I may have played a couple other rounds. Disc golf was not on my radar. I didn't own any discs. I played football and basketball, not very well, but I did play in high school and middle school, and I didn't really have a lot of other sports. I did like tossing the Frisbee around. But then in college, we had some friends, and we would just have an ultimate Frisbee lid, and we'd throw it back and forth. But then we started, practicing accuracy. So you're just, hey, I wonder if I can hit, that recycling bin, or I wonder if I can hit that light pole. And so we started just, on our own, without anybody like saying, hey, you're playing disc golf, just doing object golf, where we would walk around campus. We'd each have a disc, or a Frisbee in that case, and we would play object golf. It was super fun. I tore up my hand one time jumping over a fence to retrieve a disc that had fallen in like a utility well or something like that. I don't know what the term for it is, but the fence was sharp on the top, and I was trying to show off. My now wife was present, so it probably was like, hey, I can jump over this fence. Hey, I can put a chain link an inch into my palm, that sort of thing. And then, we started doing that enough that I was like, hey, there's actually a disc golf course on campus, or 2 9-hole courses that kind of make an 18-hole course. And I think had played one of them, and I was like, we should play disc golf. So I got a starter pack. My 3-year-old still throws the Shark from it. It was the standard Innova starter pack, AVR, Shark, Leopard, all DX, 150 gram. And we started playing pretty regularly. I started, getting way into it. And so I was buying discs and stuff, and we'd play at the college course. And then there was a really pretty course about a half an hour away. So we started playing like almost every weekend. I think because of my comfortability with the Frisbee and my just general obsession, had a little bit of an upper hand on the friends I played with. And then one summer I stayed in school for summer school, and campus was just dead and none of my friends were there. So that was the first time I really grinded disc golf. I would putt every day, and I would drive in the band's practice like football field where there was, yard markers. So I knew how far I was throwing, and I was just actually grinding for the first time. And when my friends came back, I was like a little better than them. And I was like, hey, this actually kind of worked. Like, it was not good, but that was the first time I was like, hey, I'm just going to try to figure this thing out. And then after that, I played, once I left school. So I played, probably like on average every other weekend in the last few years of college. And then when I left school, I moved around a lot with the company I worked for. So it really depended where I lived for the next 3 years on whether or not I actually played regularly. But it went from like every other weekend to probably like every other month at best, or every 6 months, until I moved to Grand Junction. You guys can probably imagine based on last week's episode, but moved to Grand Junction and still consider myself a disc golfer. I had enough discs that I probably should have been a disc golfer. At least at the time, I thought having like 15 discs was a lot, and it is a lot. Just I have a few more now, but
a few more.
Yeah, it's a little embarrassing. But met David and his twin brother John, and they played a little bit, and so I was like, hey, friends to play disc golf with, courses that are close by. This is awesome. And so I think once I knew that I had people to play with, I started getting pretty heavy back into it. Started like rebuilding my bag, rebuilding my form, playing at elevation, everything through much more stable. So I was trying to reevaluate like what I needed to throw and how I bought like Champion T-Bird, Champion Thunderbird, fresh out of the out of the bag. I don't know what it is. Max weight, and was like, oh my gosh, these things are so stable at elevation. Now that my arm had not been, I hadn't been really playing that much. I couldn't throw as far, much power. I still can't throw those discs that well. But I was like, okay, I need to figure out this whole disc thing. But and then David got super into it, like we talked last week, especially during the pandemic, and that just fueled my fire because he was playing like every day, and I was playing maybe once or twice a weekend because I was still working. This was only like 2 weeks that you didn't work, right, David?
Yeah, for sure.
But it felt like an eternity because you were making leaps and bounds. And I think disc golf is one of those things that just is the last few years, and really, the last 12 years since, sophomore year in college, whenever it was, I feel like it's one of those things that's been a sustained hobby where some hobbies come and go. And then lately it's become, because of the community aspect, I feel like it's become more than a hobby. It's not a job because we don't make any money doing it. It just costs us money. But it has become a bigger part of my life than just something I would do to pass the time or because I just had a lot of time available.
Yeah. I think you talk about it being a hobby. Being able to share something that's physical and also social with buddies that's been huge for our friend group for sure. About a year after moving here is when you had your first tournament, right?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think it was March of 2019, I think that makes sense. So yeah. Josiah
was the first of our friends that started to get into playing some disc golf tournaments. And I think your first one was it Palisade Peaks and Valleys?
Yeah, it was Palisade Awakening, which was I think it was just a B tier. I think it was a B tier. It may have been an A tier that year.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your experience with your first tournament.
I was not sure about it because it must have been 2020 because COVID had started, which was spring of 2020, right?
March 2020. Yep.
Yeah, so the tournament was in March, and we were just hearing about COVID, and I was like, I don't know that I should play in this tournament, but we knew nothing, and so I was like, hey, I'm just going to play. And my goal is, it was windy, it was cold. Palisades got a good bit of OB. It's a longer course. It's got a few wooded holes we talked about a little bit last week, so I won't belabor it. But so I just had the game plan of I'm just going to play boring disc golf. I'm going to make drives in bounds. I'm going to play within myself. I'm going to upshot well, and I'm going to putt well. And so I did that the first tournament. It's a pretty tough layout. And I had the highest. That would have been unfortunate. If you've had the highest score before, know that wasn't the goal, but it's okay. I had the lowest score in intermediate and advanced for the first round of the 3-round tournament by a few strokes, I think, on the intermediate side, maybe on the advanced side as well.
I remember following along on the app, and all of our friends texted you like, oh my gosh, Josiah's playing amazing.
Yeah, I was honestly, I didn't feel like I was playing amazing. I was just playing smart. I think I had finished off the round with bogey. The wind had really picked up, and I was in some of the open holes. And I think I also knew that I was playing within myself, but playing well. So I probably got to myself a little bit, but I was still leading the tournament after the first round. And then I got on a card with just some bombers. I mean, it was intermediate, but they were all throwing 400 feet. I felt with my 325, 350 on a good throw, and my arm was getting tired from a long course. And I think I started to try to chase their game rather than playing my game, and started to try to, not necessarily on the putts and upshots, but especially on the drive, tried to rip it every time. Mm-hmm. And not only was I throwing off my form, I was also inaccurate. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't going that far because I was just trying to throw harder rather than really just focusing on the target. And so I think I finished third. Is that right?
That sounds right.
Yeah, I think I finished third still. So it wasn't like I totally fell apart. And it was a really tough tournament. I think I shot 920 rated disc golf all the way through. But what I really learned there was hey, stick to your own game and just go. It doesn't really matter what anybody else is doing. You're playing the course, and so play that well.
For sure. I think it's fun to see how you've developed from. I mean, you've played some intermediate tournaments. That was an intermediate starting out, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And you've played some advanced as well, and you've kind of gone back and forth. Is there something as far as when you are playing tournaments that you feel like when you are at your best in a tournament of what you're doing?
Yeah, I think honestly, and we can get into this, another time around the second cup, which is our Patreon bonus content. But I think that honestly, the rest of my tournament performance after that tournament, for the most part, has been a little bit disappointing to me. I think I am a better player than I've played. I think I've probably played like 10 tournaments at this point in the last couple years. There's not that many in our area, and I've got a couple kids, so it's sometimes tough to get out, especially for those longer tournaments or the ones that are further away. But I think I haven't played as well as I would have liked. I had a big slump last year, basically from the spring to the fall. I think it was somewhat form related, somewhat confidence related, somewhat injury related. I still played in some tournaments and had fun, but it was just annoying to me to not play well. But I think in those rounds, especially especially in those, usually like 8, maybe I have 8 good holes out of 18, even in those bad tournaments. I think that probably the biggest thing for me is feeling loose and having fun. Yeah. I think when I focus on my score or the competitive landscape, I think Dave and I are very different in this. But for me, when I focus on my score or the competitive landscape, I start to feel that pressure. But I don't know that I respond poorly to the pressure. I just think that it's very difficult for me to feel smooth and free. So I think probably when I've been playing the best, the biggest thing is I'm having fun, I'm feeling loose. And so part of what I've been working on is to develop that, even if I'm on a card that's everybody's annoying or doesn't like each other or I'm not playing well, I want to have a way of, yes, I do need to play better, but I'm not going to play better by just berating myself for missing shots.
For sure. You talk about playing loose. One player that I think about, there's actually 2 players that I think about when it comes to the type of player that you kind of emulate your game after. As far as what I see from a friend's perspective, one is James Conrad. I think I mentioned the way that you approach. You don't have that massive walk up that James does. It's just so beautiful.
I would get too tired by the end of it.
But the rest of your backhanded drive has some similarities to your fluidity and what you're looking for. But the other player that I think about is Kyle Klein. When it comes to the putting game, you definitely have a nice explosive spin putt that Kyle Klein has. At times, I think you're almost too confident in that spin putt because you end up having about 3 of those spin putts per hole. But
hey, have you seen me 3-putt a hole in the last 3 months?
I haven't at all. That's the one thing I love to harass. I'm
hitting the basket.
That's the one thing that I love to harass Josiah on the most because I definitely, my weakness is starting to baby my putts. And so if I do miss, it's like right in front of the basket.
Yeah. And if I miss, it's like, if it's a 20-footer, I got a 30-footer. If it's a 30-footer, I got a 40-footer. It's not just that I putt, fairly hard. I think it's also that I don't think I'm putting hard. So usually when I'm trying to putt hard, I'm putting way too fast.
Yeah. But you also have some similarities to Kyle. I was watching Kyle Klein's forehand the other day, and just the way you approach your forehand is very methodical in the way that he approaches his forehand. I was surprised by how much it reminded me of you.
So I lack James Conrad's run up and hair, and I lack and generally, like the skills are diminished. And I lack Kyle Klein's youth. But if you take like a geriatric James Conrad with a Kyle Klein run up, there you go.
That'd be pretty sweet. And you got Josiah.
Geriatric James Conrad, but still probably kick my butt.
So tell us, we've heard a little bit about your disc golf game. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, your interests besides disc golf. What are you spending your time when you're not playing disc golf?
I try to. I get into everything. If I get into it, I get into it hard.
Josiah is a very obsessive personality.
Yeah, so this podcast is evidence of that. So I try to limit my interests. I've been trying to more and more limit my interests for the sake of my family.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say day to day, I really do enjoy coffee and beer. I love disc golf. I enjoy board games, spending time with friends in a variety of ways, but I think board games especially are fun. And then I think, depending on the season, the time of year, we have great outdoor activities here and so many opportunities to get outside. So I play all disc golf. We hike some, although sometimes when I hike, I'm like, we could be disc golfing right now. We'd still be walking and stuff, backpacks and that sort of thing. Anyway. And then
is that when you get the eye roll from Rachel?
Yeah. Yeah, probably. Anyway. But, and then we recently bought a whitewater raft, so we're hoping to get that out a little bit more. So hiking, camping, rafting, but mostly disc golf and hanging out with good friends.
Nice. What board games are you playing right now?
Oh gosh. I never learned how to pronounce it. Takinoko. I apologize. All you board gamers out there, I just got it. It's the bamboo one with the panda. It's really good. But Catan or Settlers, whatever it is.
It's Catan.
Okay, sure. Is still my all-time favorite for sure.
Yeah, that's definitely a go-to for us and our families for sure.
Hey, well, I think we've talked enough about me. You guys kind of get a sense of who I am, and you'll get more of a sense of who David and I are through the podcast. I want to move to the "How did you do that?" pro tip. And big thanks to Vanessa Van Dyken and Austin Hoop for getting back to me. They've both responded with pro tips. Vanessa Van Dyken is a Discraft sponsored FBO player, and Austin Hoop is Innova sponsored. If you haven't heard of him, you will. He is a baller. He's 1024 rated already, and he it seems like he's a grinder, so I'm sure that he'll pick it up. But both of them had a pro tips that I thought would be good to talk about on an early episode. So Vanessa said, one thing I wish I had known while I was first building my game is I wish I would have started off throwing putters and mid-ranges while developing my backhand and sidearm to ensure quality, angle control, good form. Once you build up some power and distance, then move up to fairways and distance drivers. And Austin Hoop had a pretty similar tip, and so I thought we'd just combine them on this episode because I think it reinforces, hey, multiple pros wish this if they had started over, if somebody would have told them or if they would have known. Austin Hoop said, I wish I had known that throwing putters and mid-ranges to develop solid form would be more beneficial than throwing whatever I wanted. And I think with David, you're working on cleaning up your backhand form, and this is something that honestly got me a bit out of the slump that I had earlier, was really focusing on those putters and mids.
Yeah. This is actually something that you recommended to me early on. I think a lot of pros, you're going to hear this a lot. Probably if you are beginning to watch some disc golf content to improve your game, you're probably going to hear this somewhere, because I think the temptation is to see what a pro is throwing and to want to throw it. And so you're wanting to grab those destroyers, wanting to grab those Zeuses, whatever it might be. And the reality is that you are not going to be able to throw like a pro. I think maybe later on down the road we can figure that out. But I think you got to start with the basics. And that was something that Josiah definitely encouraged me early on with my backhand, because I was, again, trying to whip these. I think I had a Wraith and a Katana that I was playing with early on. And I tried to switch. With forehand, you can rip on those and they're just fine. But you switch to a backhand and they're not going anywhere at all. I'm throwing these 200-foot mini Spike Kaisers.
Yeah, when you throw a Blizzard Katana 200 feet, that you need to work on your form a little bit.
Yep. And the moment that I started trying to throw a putter, I understood what it meant to have a clean release point with your backhand, because if you are trying to rip over on your disc and you try to do that with your putter, you are not going to be able to throw your putter straight. You're not going to be able to throw a buzz straight. There might be some overstable mid-ranges that you might be able to get to go straight. But I think throwing those putters and mid-ranges really exploits the weaknesses in your form early on, or at least that release point. Because really what you're looking for early on is that clean release point that you could find each time. And I think for me, it showed me what I was looking for. I think trying to throw, again, going back to, I love throwing the Luna, and the Luna was one disc for me that I finally understood what it meant to have that clean release point.
Yeah, I think watching you throw that Luna, I was like, oh, David actually has a good backhand. Because you never, I mean, I think throwing really overstable and really fast disc kind of stunts your growth as a disc golfer, because you don't actually know what your form, you can't separate your form from the disc. And with a putter, especially a neutral putter, we're not talking about zones here, but a neutral putter or a neutral mid, your form and the disc in large part are one. It goes where you throw it. The disc doesn't really do any work for you. You do all the work, or I should say, the line that you put it on, the angle you put it on, you'll get to see that for a large majority of the flight. Where if you throw something fast or overstable or both, the disc is going to very early on in the flight do something different than, especially at a low arm speed than what you did. And so I think it's huge. And I think the thing that I realized this spring and this winter, when I was trying to get out of the slump, trying to clean up my form again and try to get easy power, was that, putters and mids go far. When you throw them well, they go far. It's not like, I can throw a putter 80 feet and I can throw a distance driver 300 feet. It's like, oh no, there's actually between a neutral putter that you throw well and a distance driver that you throw well, there's not as big of a difference than you might think, especially on an AM level.
Yeah. I actually had gotten to the point where I was feeling good enough with my backhand that I was throwing race more consistency for distance drivers. As my arm was getting more and more sore and I felt like I was losing control, and I felt like I was no longer happy with my form, as wanting to begin to work on it. I've recently gone back to throwing my fairway driver, so I'm throwing a T-Bird 3, and then also I'll throw my Buzzz, and then when I'm practicing in the backyard, I'm basically just throwing putters back into the. But I think being willing to go back to, there's no shame in going back and wanting to understand the basics, because I think you have to be okay with getting, whether it's less distance, even if we were talking about earlier with I'm changing something up on my backhand. I'm going to be using putters and probably my Buzzz more often to get used to this arm slot with my backhand. We talked more about it in the second cup if you guys wanted to get a little extra taste of that. But if I'm trying to practice that with my Wraith, I'm going to be still fixated on trying to get the speed going as opposed to getting the motion going that I'm looking for.
We don't have any video content for you, but David is, once again, he was doing it earlier today, elbowing the couch. So.
It just feels really good. I want to let the couch know that I'm here and I'm the authority figure. I am in control.
I think the couch hears you. But you were talking about, hey, there's no shame in going back. I think the hardest thing, especially for weekend warriors, people who've got jobs or school, and you only get to play 1 or 2 rounds a week, maybe less, is it's hard to give up potential score, like when you get to go play that round. Yeah. You want to play with the disc that will fit the holes best. Yeah. That you've birdied before. And so I do think it is something that to go and play with your friends and play just putters and mids, I think is pretty tough. What I did this fall and winter was I would, and a lot of people can't do this, but I'd sneak away for like 9 holes or 7 holes at lunch, or I'd go throw in the field whenever I had some daylight hours that were warm enough, in order to get those putter and mid reps in, without necessarily giving up score on longer holes. And it's funny because I think I was probably would have scored just as well with an envy or a couple envies some rounds as I would with my whole bag, because I got to the point where I knew where I was going to put that.
Yeah.
And then, to go back to it regularly, not to just say, hey, I did the putter round thing that month 2 years ago and figured out my form. It's like, no, you need to reevaluate regularly, because I think that helps you stay consistent throughout a season or throughout a year.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, it's all about having fun. As Josiah mentioned, it might just be one day a week that you're able to get out with friends. Like for us, for me personally, being able to figure out good form and understand it well, that's fun for me. And I love being able to apply that to my game. I definitely take a lot of pride in it. I'm not necessarily good at it, but it's fun for me. I think if that's taken away from you being able to go out and enjoy playing a round of disc golf with your friends, then by all means, just go out the game is meant to be fun. Go out and enjoy playing with your friends. If there's something that you want to work on and you actually do want to get, whether it's getting better so your arm's not hurting or getting better so you throw farther, then these are definitely steps that we have found that help us out.
I totally agree. I think that for me, building my game is fun. That's why I work on it. I don't have any aspirations to tour and make millions of dollars. Well,
what?
Not this year. Not this year. Maybe next year. But I do think that it's really fun to park a hole with a putter when your buddies are throwing drivers, though.
Yeah, it definitely makes you feel. There's that little bit of pride. I think we get that because we have one of our buddies we talked about in the last podcast, Ryan Wilking. His ability to throw a putter pretty far is frustrating, disheartening at times.
Yeah, like maybe like 380 with a P2 or something like that. Yeah. Anyway, since we're talking puds. Since we're talking puds, I don't even know what a pud is. Is that a thing?
I don't know if it's a thing. You can make it a thing, I guess.
Hey, you guys can let us know. You can email us at thegrind.dg@gmail.com or hit us up on Instagram at thegrind.dg and let us know. I think a pud is a thing. Maybe I'll look it up later. But we will be reviewing the Discraft Buzzz, our What Did You Just Throw disc review. The Discraft Buzzz, most of you guys know the disc, but it's a 5-speed, 4-glide, -1 turn, and 1 fade mid-range. And we'll talk a bit about the flight numbers, whether or not it actually flies according to those numbers, how it feels, what shots is it good for, and that sort of thing. So, David, you want to start us off?
The Buzzz is a fun one for me. I think it's fun because again, we talked earlier about throwing backhand, and that's one of those discs that it will exploit your weakness if you're not having a clean release point. Because like Josiah said, whatever line you do put it on, it tends to hold that line. And so I think it's a fun backhanded disc. I use it a little bit with my forehand game as well. I've seen some pros that have really good touchy forehands do some really cool things with the Buzzz on the forehand. And it was actually from watching, I think I was watching a tournament with Brian Earhart.
That guy can flick a Buzzz.
It's pretty insane how much control he has with flicking a Buzzz. I definitely don't have that control, and I'd love to get more of that finesse with the Buzzz with the flick.
Mids are a weird world where some of them are smaller diameter, like the Zone is kind of a putter mid, but there's like the Malta and a few others are smaller diameter, but the majority are a little bit larger diameter. And I feel like for me, it's not the shape or the feel. It's just that little bit of a larger diameter that I don't like it as much on the flick. I feel like it's fun to throw on the flick, but it just don't have that comfort level.
For sure. I would agree in a way. There definitely is. I have a really weird form or finger grip with my forehand. I don't have a normal finger grip. For those of you, the normal finger grip typically for the power grip is 2 fingers underneath the rim. I actually throw with 1 finger under the rim and then 1 finger on top. So my middle finger is actually resting in that little nook that the Buzzz has. Really weird. And to me, it feels really good. It feels really natural. But again, it's hard for me to actually throw it cleanly with the forehand because I don't have that clean of a release forehand. I think I've gotten better at it. I definitely rely on those overstable discs so I can rip over on it. So the Buzzz definitely exploits that for me with the forehand.
Yeah, well, you don't have like a hyzer flip forehand game. Yeah. You're usually throwing it flat and letting the disc go hyzer, or you're throwing it hyzer all the way.
Yeah.
I feel like the flight numbers I think like the -1 to me, a fresh Buzzz is not -1. I don't think there's any turn to them when you first get them. I think they're just dead straight with a little bit of fade, at least for pro or low level pro or higher level AM power. If you have smooth form, I think they are like a point and shoot disc. And then as they work in, I do think you start to get that -1 turn where you will get a little bit of flip up on it. Yeah. But I do think it's a unique disc as a mid-range. I think there's a lot of mid-ranges that are kind of like Buzzes, but I think it's this disc that you can put a lot of power on it on the backhand and still trust it. But at the same time, you don't have a big fade. And I think when you step up to even a fairway driver, especially something faster, but you either kind of end up with one of two worlds. You either end up with something that's flippy, so you got to put on a lot of hyzer to get it to go straight, or you end up with something that's got a big. If it's got the integrity on the early flight, it's got a big hook at the end.
Yep.
And the Buzzz is just a disc that just wants to maybe a tiny bit of flip up once it's worked in, but it just wants to go straight. And then it's got this tiny little fade that, depending on how high you throw it, maybe it's 30 feet, or maybe it's 5 feet if you keep it low. But it's a lot of people know the Buzzz. Most people have tried it. If you haven't, it's a great disc.
Yeah, I definitely recommend trying it out. Actually, going back to watching Earhart throw the Buzzz with the forehand. Again, it's not a super common disc to use with the forehand. You definitely see it backhand more often, but for some reason, Earhart just throws it just so cleanly. One of the reasons why, I guess I'm giving away, I bag it, is because I rely on the forehand so much. And I watched him, he did this little turnover flick shot around trees to get out of, to scramble to the basket. And it was one of the most incredible shots that I've seen as far as just getting out of a really terrible spot. And it's a shot since watching it in that tournament that I have bagged it and adopted that same shot to my game.
Oh, cool.
And that's a big reason why I have it in my bag today, is because of that, watching that one shot.
Yeah, I think there is something to, the pros, have a lot of power, especially compared to the average amateur. The average pro is going to have way more power. But, when they're throwing putters and mids, a lot of times they're throwing at 60%, 70%. And so you do sometimes get a somewhat comparable flight in a way that you wouldn't necessarily get with a destroyer if you're just starting out or you don't have 450 feet of power. I think the feel, you're talking about feel forehand. I think the feel backhand just gives me a lot of confidence. I do think the lower lip of the rim is a little sharper, but it's not uncomfortable at all. It's got, like David was talking about earlier, it's got like a slight indentation in the bottom of the rim. And then
perfect for the finger.
Yeah, if you have a weird forehand grip. And then most Buzzes are nice and flat. I've seen a few lately that have ended up being a little domey. That's not. I'm okay with a tiny bit of shoulder, but I don't want a domey Buzzz. I like that they're flat. I think the one thing about Discraft, they have a lot of consistency. I went out and threw. I've once again letting the cat out of the bag, but I've thrown Buzzes for 12 years. I tried to replace it and decided not to. But I picked up a Buzzz that I haven't bagged in a long time, but I got, so it's probably 10 or 12 years old. It's an old tooling Z Buzzz. And I was throwing that with my newer Buzzes, and you're like, oh, this is the same disc. There's a little variation in stability, but feel and flight, you're getting the same thing. And I think that that's one really nice thing. Now, you do get a little bit of variation with plastics and wear. I think that most of the premium plastics, so Discraft has a bunch, but Z, ESP, TI or titanium, you end up with a pretty similar initial flight. I have a big Z that I got recently that has quite a bit of bite at the end of the flight, a bit more fade, and I love that to be able to complement my other Buzzes. But I think broken in ESP, I feel like they break in a little sooner than the TI or the Z or Big Z. So you get a little bit of that flip a little sooner, still have to work it in. That's what you throw, right, as an ESP?
Yeah, ESP.
And then I recently have fallen in love with these plastic names. OG Jawbreaker Glow Buzzz, which is a Ledgestone exclusive. They're a little hard to get now because I don't think they're in stock anywhere, but I've got one to give away. I'll post that on Instagram. So if you follow us at thegrind.dg, you'll be able to have a chance to win that. But I'm really liking them as a base plastic buzz. I never liked the Pro D or the Elite X buzzes, or X or Soft or whatever they're called now. Plastic names. But I really only liked throwing the premium plastics. Never found one that I really liked that was baseline. But this glow plastic, it doesn't beat up that fast, and it's got this like really beautiful, like just gentle right drift. It's not understable, but it flips up really nicely, or you can throw it just a tiny bit of hyzer or flat and get this nice right drift for the right hand backhand player. So you can get a few flights out of a buzz, but the standard buzz flight is whatever angle you throw it on, that's the angle it's going to take to the ground.
Yeah.
What type of player do you think this is good for, David?
To be honest with you, I think this is a disc that nearly everyone can bag or at least try. I think, I mean, for me personally, I think I'd encourage every amateur to consider it because, I mean, you're even seeing that this is a disc that the pros are throwing because it is something that's reliable that you can put on a line and it's going to hold that line for you. And so, yeah, I think this is kind of one of those discs that I'd encourage everybody to give it a try.
Yeah, if you like a beadless mid, or even if you don't, you should try a buzz. Most people have tried a buzz. If you're brand specific, maybe you just throw MVP or Prodigy or something. There are similar discs in those lineups. I think the buzz is somewhere between a Hex and Reactor on the MVP side. And then on the Prodigy side, somewhere between an M3 and an M4 probably. I haven't thrown a lot of M3s, so I'm not 100% sure. But I think that the buzz for me, I've tried all those discs when I occasionally get bored and want to change something up. And the buzz for me is just this perfect mid. It's exactly what you want from a mid. So I'll go straight into the rating, and we'll reintroduce the rating system. So it's just 1 to 5, and we'll sum David and my score to 10. So 1 is, this just isn't that great. 2 is, it's a fine disc, but there's definitely better options. 3 is, it's a good disc, but doesn't stand out. 4 is, it's not going in my bag, but it's fantastic. And 5 is, it's going in my bag. So David, what's your rating?
Oh man, I think I'd go straight to a 5 again. And I know it feels like I'm being a little generous because the past 2 weeks my ratings have been 5s, but this is again a disc that I find myself going back to over and over again for certain shots. And because of its reliability with those shots, I don't have to think about what it's going to do. I can just put it on its line and it's going to do it. It's fun to know. It's fun to have that disc in your bag. It's a great scramble disc. It's a great disc to be able to drive with your backhand for learning. I think it's just great all around.
Yeah. Our first few reviews, we want to get some discs that are staples in our bag, or discs that are kind of in the middle of the range stability-wise for different speeds. So we did the Wizard last week. If you didn't listen to last week's episode, David maybe threw some shade on Gateway, but you can listen to our Wizard review. We got the Buzz this week, and then we'll probably do a fairway driver, control driver, and then distance driver kind of in the middle of the lineup, and that will give us an opportunity to compare. So the Buzz is in both of our bags. I, once again, let the cat out of the bag, but it is, we'll get to discs we haven't thrown before or we don't bag as we go. I'm going to give it a 5 as well. It's in my bag, much like last week. I tried to move away from the Buzz, and I just felt like, hey, I want to try something different. What else is out there? And I came back to the Buzz and said, no, it's not a new release, but it's still just such a fantastic disc. And I think it's one that I lean on when I need to hit a gap and have a straight shot that's got some integrity. And, even in a little bit of wind, the Buzz will hold up. So once again, we'll be giving away an OG Glow Jawbreaker Buzz on Instagram, so you can follow us and win that. And that's the majority of the content for the episode. But just for fun, David, we're talking about, hey, disc golf should be fun, right? So if you had to choose one disc to play the rest of 2022, no other discs. If you lose it, it comes back to you that same day, so that's a positive. But you only get one disc to play the rest of the year. Drive, putts, up shots, wind, no wind. What are you going to choose?
We're talking putting with it too, right?
Everything.
Flat top Firebird.
Oh my gosh.
Every single time
might say that.
Every single time I miss my putt, I putt with my flat top Firebird in the basket. I don't know why I don't just putt with the flat top Firebird, but it's a beautiful thing. But how about you?
So that went against everything we just said in the episode. We're like, hey, throw more putters and mids. Don't throw that overstable. David's like, one of the most overstable drivers on the planet. That's all I would throw.
Yeah.
Oh, I think I would probably pick like a premium plastic Envy. It'd be between a premium plastic Envy and a premium plastic Buzzz. I think the one thing with the Envy is if you got into a lot of wind, I still feel like I could spin a Buzzz into a pretty big headwind and be okay. And I think the Envy, just being a little bit slower, takes a little bit of a more precise throw. But I'm going to give it to the Envy because I can just be terrible on windy days, but I still feel like I could putt fine with it. And they just go so far for a putter that I feel like for a one disc round or one disc year, that would probably be my choice.
You've been a little obsessed with your Envy lately. You've definitely thrown it on more and more holes, and it seems like even on holes that you wouldn't necessarily go to it, you want to see what it's going to do.
I threw it on a second shot on at Watson on hole 15 this week when I played a few holes, I guess on Sunday.
Okay.
I didn't mention that in How's the Disc Golf Week. I know. I played holes without David. Don't tell him.
Oh, man.
And I threw the Envy on 15, which was in like the 310 position by that little tree.
Okay.
And I parked it with my Envy. I was like, yeah, it's probably 10 short. So it's probably like right at 300 feet. And I was like, oh, dang, I can throw a putter 300 now.
That's awesome.
That felt really good. It not very windy. It was a little bit of a beat up Electron one. So base plastic. So I got that nice little flip up and then like just dead straight cruise. I threw 2 Buzzes and an Envy, and the furthest one was 20 feet away. So I felt pretty good about it.
That's awesome.
Anyway, just want to give a thank you to the pros who offered their pro tips. If you're a pro and you want to send in a pro tip, feel free to send us that via Instagram, or you can send us an audio clip at thegrind.dg@gmail.com. Thanks to Kiln Coffee Bar for the coffee for this episode. If you would like to subscribe, that would be amazing. We are pretty excited about the podcast. This is episode 2, but we plan on doing it for a long time, and we'd love to join you on your disc golf journey. Just remember this week, whether it's disc golf or coffee, to enjoy the grind.